The year is 1991. The Chicago Bulls have won the NBA championship against the LA Lakers. Sonic the Hedgehog is released in the United States. Nickelodeon debuts Nicktoons, and Sony releases a headphone that's gonna fuck shit up and be a staple in studios around the world for decades to come. It's not often something is so good that it stands the test of time, but the things that do are pretty special. That's right, we're talking about the MDR 7506. That intro was really annoying to edit. I'm never going all out like that for a video ever again. Ugh. You know, I talked about a super prolific headphone before on this channel, the Audio-Technica M50X. It's a headphone you've definitely seen before if you watch podcasts or YouTube or Twitch streamers, and it's used in studios everywhere. I've been pretty critical of the M50X in the past. While its build quality, aesthetic, passive noise isolation, and portability are all great aspects of that headphone, it's always felt like it lacked in the area that's most important to me: sound quality. There's a lot of hype over the M50X, but its shortcomings are quite prominent. It has a huge bass boost that prioritizes quantity over quality, its treble response is peaky and uneven, resulting in a really weird timbre, and it's generally just not very detailed. So why is it so popular? Because Beyoncé's mixes are done with it. Because your favorite Twitch streamer or podcaster is using it. It's often the first piece of gear a person sees when looking at an audio setup. Where am I going with this? There's plenty of stuff out there that's overhyped. You try it, and you're super excited to see what all the rage is about, and then it sucks. And the disappointment you experience is so unquantifiable, it can feel like you just got kicked in the dick in the middle of watching Megamind 2. Why does that movie exist? But on rare occasions, something truly is worth the hype. Something that is so good, it's never needed to change. Much like how the horseshoe crab has existed in its current form for billions of years. Another closed-back headphone that is just as, if not more prolific than the Audio-Technica M50X, and it's a position that's very well deserved. And it's held that position for over 30 years at this point. It's been a staple in studios and on the heads of music listeners all around the world since 1991, the Sony MDR 7506. Let's talk about it. Build quality. The MDR 7506 has a design that's very simple. I've heard some people call the look of this headphone boring, but that's something I would disagree with. This thing has a retro aesthetic that I really vibe with. I know it wasn't retro when it first released, but I mean, its look has never changed, and it's over 30 years old, and it doesn't need to. It's awesome. The design is very durable, yet it's also very lightweight, and this headphone has a reputation for lasting literally forever. Like, there's units that were built in the 90s that still work perfectly today, so if you're worried about it suddenly breaking on you, the chances of that happening are pretty slim. It's very well constructed. The ear cups are pretty thin, but consider this. I'm a huge klutz, and I've already dropped them on a concrete floor, and this guy shrugged it off like nothing happened, like the Giga Chad of a headphone it is. Bro, the 7506 is like the old Nokia of headphones. The floor will break before the headphones do. The ear cups are made of plastic, but we do have a metal adjustment mechanism along with a metal hinge that allows the headphones to fold up for portability. Plus, the plastic that's used is a harder plastic that makes the headphone feel robust and durable. The headband on this is covered in a decent quality faux leather that, while thin, also feels sturdy. This isn't necessarily related to the build quality, but one thing that's super worth mentioning, these things are cheap. You can get these used on eBay for like 50 bucks, and that's exactly how much I got mine for. This pair is definitely a few years old, but aside from the dust, it still feels mint. Build quality on this headphone, along with its reliability and affordable price, is something that I find very attractive. There is one thing about the build quality I'm not so enthusiastic about though, and that's the cable. I really don't like this coiled cable. I find that it's just too heavy and often gets in the way. And unfortunately, it's not a detachable cable, so if you're not a fan of this cable type, you're just gonna have to tolerate it. I can't fucking stand this goddamn cable. But yeah, you got metal in the adjustment mechanism with these little notches that make it super easy to adjust, and plenty of cup swivel to fit your head. And the fact that it's small means it can fit into a backpack with ease. But yeah, build quality is good. In truth, I don't have too much to say about the build quality and features because it's a really simple design that's rugged and sturdy. I could have probably made this section of the video shorter and cut out some of the redundancies in the script, but I chose not to because, well, I still have that I need to reach the minimum word count, otherwise I'll get a bad grade on the assignment mentality, just a little bit. Comfort. This headphone is overall pretty comfortable to me. The fact that it's light, like I mentioned earlier, definitely helps with wearing it for long listening sessions. Though, I do have a couple of complaints. These have really thin ear cups, and most people's ears are going to touch the inside, especially if you're using the pads that come installed on them. The drivers basically sit up right against your ear. You can see here I've got some alternate pads on them right now, and I will talk more in depth about them later, but yeah, these pads here improved the comfort tenfold, though they do have an impact on the tuning, but like I said, we'll get there when we get there. But the default pads on these, well, they look like this. There's not much to them. They're thin, and they're made of foam, and while they're soft, for me personally, I feel like they don't provide enough distance and cushioning. Also, the radius of the ear cups is quite small. The pads, both aftermarket ones and the default ones, fail to fully encompass my ears. The outer edges of the pads rest on my ear, and while it doesn't bother me personally, for some people with big ears, they are not going to like that. Thankfully, these have what I consider to be the perfect amount of clamp force, just enough so that the headphone fits securely and seals, but not enough to feel as though your head is being crushed like a grape. There's not much padding on the headband, and initially I thought I would have a problem with it, but actually, I don't. The clamp force is enough to secure it to your head, and the headphone is so light that it doesn't leave any pressure on the top of your head, so that was a pleasant surprise. Sound quality. This is a very good sounding headphone. So let's start off with the tuning. With the default pads, this headphone sounds very balanced. It's the closest thing I've heard thus far that sounds like a true neutral tuning. Its frequency response is very even. The bass extends very low, and the mid and upper bass have a noticeable amount of punch. Impact on the bass is quite satisfying. The more I listen to this headphone, the more I'm starting to prefer this neutral sound profile over stuff that's tuned to Harman. Harman-tuned headphones and IEMs often have a rise in the sub bass, but also lack punch because there's typically a tuck in the lower mid-range and upper bass. This tuck combined with the sub bass boost results in a headphone that has rumble but lacks warmth and punch. It too often leaves me feeling like there's something missing. I just want a little bit more meat in the bass. The 7506 does not have a bass forward sound signature, but I prefer how it sounds in the mid bass over something that's tuned to Harman. It both extends low and has that sense of impact that I so often crave. Plus, this headphone's presentation makes it sound like it has more bass than how it might measure. The bass sounds tight, but it also has a really long decay. I recommend listening to any song with big orchestral bass drums to really experience this effect, because those booms, they just seem to last forever, and it's really fun. It's very clear through the mid-range, and nothing about the treble is overly harsh or piercing. Vocals don't stand out as being overly forward, yet they aren't veiled. Like I said with the Moondrop Space Travel, instruments and vocals sound like they're exactly where they should be, in my opinion. People who like more forward-sounding vocals might be disappointed by this aspect of the 7506's frequency response, but I personally really like it. The treble extension also goes quite far, and this is going to make the headphones seem detailed, though good treble extension and increased treble doesn't necessarily equal a more detailed sound, as detail is sort of hard to define and varies from person to person, but detail is a video for another time. Anyways, yes, the treble is quite satisfying, not overly bright, but not dark either. This really balanced sound signature is one of the reasons why people love it for mixing, and that's what it was originally designed to do. No frequency range is designed to stand out over another, that way you're getting an accurate depiction of your mix. But this also makes this headphone kind of a Swiss Army knife when it comes to music genres. It doesn't enhance any one frequency range, so all music sounds equally good. There are some headphones that have sound signatures that make them more suited for certain genres over others. The Beyerdynamic DT1990, for example, is a good sounding headphone that people like a lot for how detailed it is, and people really like it for stuff like jazz and classical music, and it has a tuning that I would consider to be good, but I definitely wouldn't want to use it for something like rock and metal music. Its sound signature is just way too bright leaning to enjoy those genres to their fullest in my opinion, but the 7506 doesn't really have this problem. The sound signature does change a fair amount when you switch to the alternate pads, however. It adds just a bit extra to the sub bass and makes the treble more pronounced. Acoustic instruments sound more crisp, and it adds breath to some vocalists, but I did notice that it can make cymbals sound a little too harsh and bright, as well as giving an unpleasant edge to other vocalists. Like, with these pads, vocalists who naturally have a really smooth sounding voice sounded even smoother with a bit of added airiness, but vocalists whose voices have a bit of a rougher sound quality to them sounded pretty grating, though the increased treble will lead to more perceived detail for some, and while some people might call this kind of sound signature analytical, or energetic. I, however, call it no. Overall, I prefer the more balanced tuning of the default pads, but I prefer the comfort of the alternate pads, and that's how I currently use them. It's worth mentioning that these do take really well to EQ, so I did a few EQ tweaks with the alternate pads to get it closer to the tuning of the default pads, and suddenly, I was in for a very pleasant listen. The neutral sound signature also makes this headphone very good for people who are new to EQ and want to learn how to do it. Now, onto the subjective aspects. So, this might sound sort of weird, but the presentation of this headphone is what I would call dry. Dry is the word that I would use to describe its timbre. It's not the most natural sounding headphone I've listened to. Its timbre is still pretty good, but something like an HD6XX still beats it out in terms of timbre and overall musicality. This headphone does not aim to enhance the music in any way, and this is both a strength and a weakness. So this headphone is really good at finding those small details in recordings and making them really noticeable. It is excellent when it comes to presenting information, but that also means it's good at finding faults in recordings. So if you're listening to a live recording and someone in the audience lets a nasty fart fucking just rip, you're gonna hear it, baby. It does not sugarcoat anything. For music listeners, this could be a detriment, as it's not very musical sounding, but it's another reason why people like to use it for mixing. Like I said, it can be both a strength and a weakness depending on who you ask. Something I neglect to talk about in my reviews often is dynamics, and typically it's just because I don't know how to talk about them. I'm still new to this review thing, you know, one day I'll get there. So, dynamics basically is the presentation of loud and soft volumes in a song. Some headphones are really good at differentiating between soft and loud, and dynamics also play an important part in musical composition too. The reason I bring this up is, part of what makes the MDR 7506 sound not very musical is that it's not very good with dynamics. Instruments all sound like they're sort of playing at the same volume at all times, which, again, depending on who you ask, could be good or bad. Instrument separation on this headphone, as well as imaging, is top notch. I have absolutely no trouble hearing instruments separated from one another, and the sound localization of the MDR 7506 is not just good for the money, it's straight up good. It gives my AKG K702 a run for its money, and is something that it's actually better at than an HD600. Kinda crazy how a headphone that costs $50 can beat the HD600 at something, isn't it? Though the HD600 isn't necessarily known for its really good imaging and instrument separation, but still, I feel it's worth mentioning. However, the soundstage on the MDR 7506 is pretty non-existent. The music is all very up close and for the most part, sounds like it's coming from inside your head. I wasn't really surprised by this, but I am someone who prefers a bit more of a wider soundstage out of my headphones. And if you're like me, you may not like this aspect of the 7506. I've made a few comparisons against the HD600/6XX, so to make one more, well, the HD600 series aren't known for having an incredibly wide soundstage, and the 7506 is even more intimate sounding than how those sound. I could see this aspect of the headphone being a deal breaker for some. Power requirements. Man, this thing does not need an external amp at all. It is super unfussy about what you plug it into, so if you've only got a laptop, this will run out of it no problem. I have tried plugging it into a few of my different amplifiers, and found there wasn't much variation between any of them. Some amplifiers can change the sound of headphones, but the MDR 7506 remained consistent between all of mine. So if you want a good sounding headphone but don't have the money in the budget to also spend on an amp, this is a good option. So to summarize, the MDR 7506 is a very neutral sounding headphone that takes well to EQ, making it generally well suited for all music genres. And while it's very good at presenting information, its dry timbre, poor dynamic performance, and intimate soundstage might be disappointing to people who want to use it specifically for listening to music and content, but people who edit or mix may actually really like those qualities. Do I recommend it? Yes, I absolutely do. I don't think you're gonna find a headphone that's this well built and sounds this good for a price that's this affordable, at least outside of Sony. Sony also has the MDR V6 and the CD900 ST, which are based off of the same platform and look nearly identical in appearance but have different tunings. The CD900 ST is a bit more on the brighter side, and the V6 has that Harman-like bass shelf, but the MDR 7506 is kind of like an in-between for those two headphones, and ultimately is the one I prefer out of those three. The MDR 7506 is perfect for an audiophile on a budget. The fact that there's so many available on the used market for under $100 $500 just makes them a blind buy in my opinion. Recently, I got back into my CD collection, so it's really cool to listen to music of the 90s on a CD with headphones that were widely used during that time period too. And there's a decent chance that the music I was listening to was mixed on a 7506. And I don't know, it's kind of neat because it makes me feel like I'm experiencing a little bit of history. Some designs are good for the time, but as stuff gets better, they become obsolete and get phased out. But some designs are so good, they become classics. The Sennheiser HD600, the Koss Porta-Pro, Stax Lambda, Beyerdynamic DT770, and the 7506. Sony was really cooking with this one, which is why I feel it's such a shame that I can't rank it higher than Apple EarPods. Truly, no one has managed to challenge this apex predator of an audio playback device. Okay, goodbye.